Hello my friends, welcome to another painting video, and this time around we're doing a German officer from the brand Alpine in 1:35 scale. So let's do it. Alright, so we're starting with this tone called German Uniform Green to paint the first metal box in the base. I use an Ultra 2-in-1 airbrush by Harder & Steenbeck, and I dilute the paint with airbrush thinner Vallejo as needed. Both the figure and the base were primed with Vallejo Hobby Paint Rattle Can in color white, and the wooden plinth was masked off to protect the base from the paint. I am going to apply 2 thin layers to the box just to get an even finish, and then I am off to the figure. For the base layer of the leather jacket, I used a 50-50 mix of Vallejo Black and German Grey. This mix will also be sprayed to the boots of the figure. I work very slowly to build up the paint with several thin layers until we are satisfied with the base color. We never want to rush the coverage or flood the miniature with too much paint, creating undesired texture. The next tone I chose was the German Field Grey. This tone is also going to be used for the hat of the officer and the coffee cup. Also, I masked off the previous box to protect it from this airbrush layer. The mug and the metal jerry can were taken from a mini art kit, and the metal box comes from a Vallejo Cines kit. I highly recommend those two brands for all of your display bases or your dioramas. And here we have the base layers finished, and we are ready to switch the paintbrush. For the remaining process, I am using a wet palette and only water for diluting all of the acrylic paint. Next in line are the pants of the figure. The 4 tones I am mixing and trying out are Field Drab, German Field Grey, Chocolate Brown, and Saddle Brown. As with all of the products in the video, you can use the brand of your preference and best availability. The only important thing here is what it works for you. Okay, so first I apply a light coat of mainly Field Drab and Saddle Brown, and as you can see in the video, this does not fully cover the primer yet. And it's okay, as we are still exploring the colors and comparing it to the camo references we have at hand. Once that I apply a color base, I leave it to dry and move on to the next part of the pant. At this point, I am not trying to blend any color yet, and I'm just trying to establish the base color. For all of the base layers, I use a Monument Hobby size 6 brush to apply all of the paint. Okay, so now that I have a good idea on what my medium tone will be on the pants, I apply a darker layer adding chocolate brown to the mix. This will go on the folds and creases where the light would hit less. Fortunately, Alpine Miniatures does a very good job with the sculpt of the clothes, so we don't have to invent many volumes in the painting process. So I would just hit the naturally darker and less exposed parts in the pants. Do not worry if you see that in this step everything looks messy, as we will clean up in the next steps. With the same mix, I am going to paint the first pass of the leather belt and the binocular strap in order to combine the garments with the pants. Military figures usually have a lot of components in the gear and the uniform, so it's advised to maintain the principal colors in our selected scheme throughout the figure, to avoid making it too busy or too confusing for the eye. In order to paint the red details on the shoulders, I am starting with Kimera Red Oxide. I will use this color to paint the details in the officer hat as well. I am switching now to a Windsor brush size 0 for the remaining of the painting work, and also the figure is held to a Citadel handle using only blue tack to adjust as necessary. Definition is perhaps one of the most important things when painting miniatures, particularly in military ones that have a lot of pockets, weapons, medals, and many components to a single piece. There are multiple ways and techniques to achieve quick definition, such as an oil or acrylic wash, working from a black prime miniature, but I generally prefer the so-called black lining technique. I use a black ink for the intensity of the pigment and also for the consistency, as it is ready to apply for the bottle. So what I do is basically trying to separate all of the main components of the miniature from each other, meaning the pants from the jacket, the map carry case from the arm, the jacket from the gloves, and every pocket is being black lined from the jacket itself. This will create separation and will be easy to identify each of the components of the miniature to the eye. Now back to the pants of the miniature. Having the dark brown layer already dried, we are applying the middle tone again, which is mostly earth olive drab and saddle brown. We are doing as many layers and passes as necessary to all of the places that would naturally hit the light, and we are trying to avoid all of the places we have already shaded. At this point, we are starting to clean and blend all of the transitions in the pants, so we start to give the effect of the material we are painting. Because this will be my first time doing freehand camo on a miniature, I won't spend too much time doing the blendings because I am sure I will need to correct the oak leaf camo a lot, so a decent transition is more than enough in this step. For the highlights, I added a bit more of saddle brown to our mix, and also a tone called Vallejo base skin tone, which is basically a light pink. At this point, I am using a high diluted paint in the brush, and I'm only passing through the most prominent spots of all of the folds in order to accentuate the effect. At this point, you can adjust the contrast as you prefer by making the shades darker, and you can increase your highlights up to white if you prefer. Having a wet palette really makes things easier when layering because we have all of the previously mixes and colors available for any correction we may find necessary. And also, it helps to maintain a good dilution in our paint throughout our painting sessions. For this video, I am using a red grass wet palette, but I am replacing the paper with Masterson's Premier palette, as it tends to be more resistant to my mixing and my use. You can try any brand and combination that works for your style of painting. Alright, so for the binocular straps, they are being highlighted using the tone Vallejo New Wood. I primarily do this on the edges and the zones of maximum light. For all of the fine details, there is always a lot of correction and repetition, so do not worry if you happen to paint where you didn't mean to. In this stage, for example, I had to grab a black ink again and redefine the straps several times. Also, I am using the same color to do stippling and small dots on the leather belt edges to imitate the effect of use. I try to avoid the center of the belt except for small scratches. Alright, so moving on to the jacket, that we primarily use two tones, the standard Vallejo black and forest skin from the Nocturna set, which is very similar to any earth tone or olive drab. In general, my miniatures that are predominantly black tend to have this bluish effect at the end, commonly seen in the Warhammer Black Templars or Sisters of Battle figures, which is amazing, particularly for metallic figures, but in this case I wanted to try something different. So I went to my teacher Arturo Flores, who recommended me to do exactly the opposite, to paint the shadows in cold tones, but to highlight with warm tones, specifically some kind of brown. And so, for the shadows, we're very lucky to have airbrushed a 50-50 mix of black and German grey in our first step, so we only need to work on highlighting right now. In the same manner as the pants, I am doing several layers of paint over the most prominent parts of the jacket, those who would get most zenithal light, mainly on the raised surfaces. At this point, I am not going over any of the darker parts of the jacket, and we are slowly mixing in the earth tone that we chose until we get a nice contrast that we are happy with. The edges of the jacket and the pockets were also stippled very much so like we did on the leather belt, with uneven dots, scratches and marks, but this case we're using our highlight forest skin color. This, with the help of our previously black lining step, will make the jacket to pop and to be better defined to the eye. It will also help us to sell what kind of material this jacket is made of. This German officer was also a tank commander, so he might be carrying a map board in his side. In order to paint it, I used black on all of the metal parts as a foundation, and I used the same tones as the pants for the cover. I paint the edges of the document with light pink, and also I make diagonal scratches to add some texture and information. Because it is still too empty for my taste, I decided to paint a name tag on the front of the cover. So I grabbed Vallejo Ivory from Game Color and started to mark the rectangle area. After that, I went with black ink to paint the area of the rectangle and made some small dots over the ivory name tag. I repeat the diagonal scratches with light pink to add more depth onto the front of the cover, and also I added a little signature on the bottom left. After that, I continue with the metal parts of the edges with grey, and then a little bit of white on top just to imitate a simple metallic effect. These kind of small details are a great introduction to start practicing freehand and adding our own mark onto the figures. This kit of German officers in the Ardennes offers 2 figures with 2 heads each. The quality is very good, so I can heavily recommend it for easy conversions and swaps for the 1:35 scale on military miniatures. I choose to not glue the figure and paint it separately to have all of the angles available and also to be able to adjust the position of the head as necessary when it's finished. The base color I used was Vallejo olive green with a touch of Vallejo black, and then I painted a second layer with only olive green. I proceed to paint the red lines in the hat with the same Kimera red oxide color, and then I cover the front and the middle part of the hat with the color black. I try to paint any apparel or hats before painting the face, just to avoid any undesired paint slips and mistakes to touch the finished work, and this also will help us to see how it matches and how it combines overall with the face. To our olive green, I am adding German field grey to highlight the raised surfaces on the hat. I do several thin layers on the most prominent parts and also on the front and edges, without touching the shadow parts. In order to get a good and solid transition, we need to add slowly a higher amount of field grey until we are happy with the contrast. The higher the material needs to reflect the light, the higher the intensity we go with the contrast. With a light grey, I paint the first layer of the eagle and skull signs modeled into the hat, as well as the front edge of the cap. And then I proceed to outline the symbols very carefully with black ink to help with the definition. After that, I go with pure white color to highlight the top of the symbols, and then we are ready to move on. Alright, so we're going to the most fun part of the process, which is painting the face of the figure. It's so much easier to paint a high quality and detailed sculpt rather than a more simple one, especially on this 1:35 scale. The colors I like to use for painting skin tones generally are Vallejo medium flesh tone, which is primarily yellow, Vallejo medium flesh, which is light pink, game color purple, and black red. First, I start with a combination of purple and red with a touch of medium flesh to get a very dark skin base. This will serve us as a groundwork for the majority of the skin tones, and this will also help us have different tones in place. We want to avoid painting the face with just one color in order to not have the commercial toy effect. After our first layer, we will be increasing our mix with the yellow medium flesh tone with each consecutive layer until we land to the skin tone we are looking for. For this figure in particular, we are aiming at a Caucasian or similar skin. In the first layers, I am covering all of the red base I have painted, and with this we will start to getting the effect of real skin. It is super important to let the layers dry before painting the next one, as we don't want any rough texture in the skin. Generally speaking, we will try to leave the red tones on the cheeks and the nose, the purple will stay on the eyes and the back of the eyes, and the green or grey will go to the beard. Painting the eyes is arguably the most difficult part of the face, so I try to paint it at the beginning stages. I use Vallejo ivory to outline where the eyes are located in an horizontal manner, and then with Vallejo black ink I try to paint the eyes in the top center of each eye socket. I make sure that the pupil of the eye do not touch the upper and bottom edges at the same time unless the figure has that particular eye stare. Then I correct the limits of the eyes as necessary. I avoid painting the eyes with pure white, and I do not paint with pure black the surrounding of the eye, as to not have a too aggressive contrast that pull away from the realistic military face we are attempting to make. Sometimes it is better to simulate the sight and the eyes than to make a very prominent white spots that will draw us away from the figure. If the stare is to our liking, we can continue to paint the rest of the skin. As soon as I am happy with the general skin tone, I will begin trying to only work on the areas I want to highlight. I will use a combination of medium flesh tone with an increasing amount of light pink to slowly work on the volume of the figure. In a general sense, I try to maintain the highlights on the upper part of the cheekbones, the ears, the nose, the chin, and the upper part of the mouth. For each additional layer, we are reducing the area we are applying to it, so we make a nice gradient between our shadow color, then our main skin tone, and then the highlight. This highlight can go up to pure white if it is your preference. At this point, it is about correcting the volumes to simulate the facial structure you want your figure to have. A great trick I like to use to add some life to the figure is to grab a sepia or skin ink and mix it with our medium flesh tone. Then I dip the excess water onto the towel, and with this very light filter we apply it to the red zones of the face. These mainly are the ears, the lower part of the cheekbones, the nose and the lips. This filter will help us bring back all of the red tones to our face and will contribute to the realistic effect. We can also do the same with a gray or green and mix it with our skin tone to simulate an incipient beard zone or a shaved hair. For our final touches, we work on the maximum highlights with light pink or pure white to all of the zones we want to try to remark. We also try to fix all of the parts that make noise to us when looking at it. And with this, we have finally finished our simple but effective miniature face. After I finished to paint the head, I really wanted to repaint the neck cloth because the initial white color I chose was making too much noise for me, and it was also attracting too much attention instead of the face that I've just painted. So I covered it in dark green again, and then I highlighted it with the same color as the hat, which is a field gray color. I proceed to glue the head to the figure in a pose I like, and then I was ready to move on to the camouflage. Next on the line is the oak leaf camo. Because it is my first time attempting to paint camo in military figures, I first started painting the back of the pants first, so when I paint the front it has somewhat better quality. The colors I chose for the camo is this combination of Vallejo New Wood and Kimera Warm Yellow. The process that I used was to first paint all of the dark spots as close as I can to an actual camo reference I have at hand with the color German Black Brown. Then, when this layer has dried, I put a 50-50 mix of Vallejo New Wood and Kimera Warm Yellow, and I paint the inside of almost every dark spot on the pants. And finally, I used pure Kimera Warm Yellow to highlight the inside of every yellow pattern, only on the areas of maximum light. You can use retarder medium in order to prevent the paint from drying on the paintbrush when doing your freehand detailing. For this camo in particular, it is very important to maintain round or curved edges, as the squared and pointy shapes will take away from the look of this traditional German oak leaf camouflage. I will continue practicing different types of camos so I can get you better tips, but for the moment I will put in the description a fantastic video by the master Calvin Tan that helped me a lot with this technique. When I finish the pattern, I grab the same pink color I used to highlight the pants. This is made by Saddle Brown and Light Pink, and I repeat the highlights on all of the folds that do not have camouflage. I paint a second layer of highlights with only light pink on the most prominent parts that will be receiving the light. This step really brings the whole work together, as the eye starts to recognize it as a fabric with an appropriate volume, shadow and lights. With this, we have finished painting the camo pants, and we are ready to move on to paint our simple display base. A very fast way to weather scenery is to use oil paints, as many scale modelers know. You can varnish your acrylic layers first to protect the paint from the thinner and oil from this step. I chose Winsor Artist Color Black and Winsor Winton Van Dyke Brown to create a wash consistency with the help of an AK thinner. I almost always avoid using acrylic washes onto my figures because they tend to leave stainings and uneven gradients, but with oils this is not the case. I apply this oil wash with a brush only to the parts where we require the shadows. I avoid applying it universally to the parts I need highlighting in order to avoid darkening the whole base layer I have already applied. I focus mainly on the edges and parts that are in need of definition and separation on both the metal cans and in the materials that are on top. I give the oil paint a few minutes to dry to the touch, and then I start to remove the excess paint from all of the objects we have applied the oil paint. First, I use a Q-tip and AK thinner to go over the general areas, and then I switch to the brush with thinner to remove it with more precision. Now that we have added depth and definition to the scenery, I am leaving it to dry for at least a day, and then I switch to the paintbrush to continue the weathering and detailing. The hammer handle is painted with Vallejo new wood color, and then I apply lines with black ink to recreate the effect of wood grain. I repeat this step a couple of times. When this is dried, I apply Citadel Rakeland Flesh shade to the hammer for a nice final effect. I like to also use this shade to apply to leather straps for a very similar result. The metal of the tools are painted black, and then I paint the edges with grey. Only at the very end I put a dot of white to simulate this metallic effect. The mug was painted with a field grey and numerous layers of lines so that I tried to simulate the volume of the object. This field grey is the same color that I am using for the hat and the cloth of the figure. In this point, I noticed that everything was too tidy, so I grabbed Citadel's ACRYLICS Earth shade and I applied it to the bottom of the mug to simulate as if the coffee was spilled below the mug. Next in line we are doing some chipping around the metal boxes, so I grabbed the same field grey color plus a little bit of white and I begin detailing the edges of the objects primarily. I tried to do many dots, scratches and damages to the places that would have more use and more weathering. I also tried to maintain these scratches as small as possible, and then I proceed to do the same with German black brown and try to add some depth inside of the light green chipping. This is a very similar technique for chipping that it is used by many scale modelers in their tanks, and I think that it can also be applicable to many display and gaming miniatures. Because this piece will be seen in person, I wanted to have some additional effects, so I grabbed Vallejo fuel stains and I applied just a small amount of it to the gasoline can and also in the coffee spill. This will have a gloss end result that works really well. If the piece would be seen only in photographs, I would try to be more careful of any kind of gloss effect that would change how the light is perceived. For the final part, I apply some dry leaves by the brand Ammo by Mig. I twist them in different shapes and then I proceed to glue them individually, scattering them all around the base in the most random way I can do. At this point, I decided to go for a wet mud ambience to get a little bit of contrast between the officer and the rough terrain in which he is walking by. For this, after all of the leaves were scattered, I applied ACRYLICS Earth Shade Wash to integrate them with the terrain. After this wash was done, I applied the same Vallejo fuel stain to the dark mud areas and in some leaves in order to give this wet and gloss effect to the base. And with this, we have finally finished our single military figure display. Overall, I am very pleased with the end result, and I hope this video can give you some tips to paint your military figures for your scale models, for display, or for your wargaming miniatures. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any question or comment regarding the materials or anything in the video, put it in the comment box below. If you like it, subscribe to the channel. My name is Rogelio and I'll see you hasta la próxima.